Okay, so here we are. This is the first lecture on Chapter 8. Chapter 8 is on inflation. And as usual, before we get started, I've got a few articles from today's Wall Street Journal. You know, I get up every morning, and that's the first thing I do is read the Wall Street, and usually there's something in there that worthy to talk about. First thing I want to talk about is this article here. It says, student loan worries rise. And it's kind of interesting, according to this article, that about 43%, or about 22 million students, are behind on their mortgage, on their loan payments. So there's a real 22 million. That's a lot. It says that there's one company which services student loans and offers payment plans tied to income, says it attempts to reach each borrower on average of 230 to 300 times, and many of these students still can't be reached. So anyway, that's of course what's one of the reasons for this big loan default for student loans.
It's because after students finish college, they have a hard time
Exactly.
finding jobs.
Yeah, exactly. And when
they can't pay back.
And most of the jobs, yeah, exactly. And most of the jobs, when you can find them, are they high paid professional jobs, or?
No, they end up working at 7-Eleven.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's a tragedy, and it should not be this way. I mean, it wasn't this way when I graduated from college several years ago. And there are reasons for it. I mean, these things just don't happen for no reason, which is part of the reason why we talk about the things that we do. Well, the other is in the same newspaper on the opinion page. There's actually two articles here. I just want to mention one briefly. The first one is, says they want your IRA. It's about the Panama Papers. I'm not going to go into detail about this. I don't know much to really talk about it, but what the Panama Papers is all about is that there's a bank in Panama that evidently has made possible many wealthy people around the world to hide their money so that they don't pay taxes on it, and a lot of this is coming to light. So anyway, that's a lot in the news. But the one I really want to talk about is called Jack Lew's Political Economy. Now, Jack Lew is the Secretary of the Treasury. Now, part of the reason why I want to mention this article is I mentioned this before, but it's not a matter of government having more power or less power. But the power source has gravitated toward not just the executive branch in the federal government, but to these government agencies. Many of these government agencies, like the Treasury Department, has a great deal of authority. And no matter who's president, whether it's a Democrat or Republican, or what their political or economic views are, many of these agencies have a great deal of power to do what they want to do, and that's where the real power source is. In fact, there's one organization that we talk about a lot in the chapters coming up called the Financial Consumer Protection Agency, that was brought into existence through an executive order. Dimitri was brought into existence through executive order, in other words, bypassing Congress completely. And see, under a constitution, the Congress has the power of the purse. So the president can bring any program into existence But if Congress doesn't want to fund it, then that program can't continue. So that this is a part of our checks and balances. Our forefathers gave our Congress the power of the purse. Okay? Now, with this Consumer Financial Protection Agency, what happened is that it was brought into existence through an executive order, so Congress had nothing to do with it. It has almost absolute power over our financial industry. It was tucked under the Federal Reserve, but the Federal Reserve has no control over it. And its funding comes from assets of the Federal Reserve. So the Federal Reserve takes a certain percentage of their income and gives to support this agency. And it was set up to where this agency has almost absolute power, where the president has very little power over the decisions that this agency makes. That's the way it was brought into existence this way. And one of the reasons for this is that sometimes presidents have a certain agenda, but they're afraid that their agenda won't be continued once they leave office. So by bringing into existence an agency that supports this agenda, but that agency is given almost absolute power, then this agenda can continue even after this president is no longer in office. See how that works? And this is part of the reason why these agencies have had a great deal of power. Well, the Treasury Department lately, just yesterday in fact, has made some very new regulations. And from what I read, and it's too early to really know a lot about it, but from when I can understand that a lot of these regulations are strictly from the U.S. Treasury, not from our government, not from Congress, not from our president, but this agency has simply acted on its own. And it has changed the rules. Now, y'all know what inversion is. You should know that by now. An inversion is when an American company is bought up by a foreign company, and then the home domicile is moved to that foreign country in order to avoid some of the tax laws of the United States. The United States has the highest tax laws in the world. Our regulations are one of the most stringent in the world, put on business. And we're the only country in the world that taxes income that an American company makes in a foreign country, if that money is brought back to America. We're the only ones in the world that does that. So the tax burden on U.S. companies is greater than in most other countries, and we live in a very international world. It's very global. Business is very global, and companies have to always consider their competitors, which are very often in other countries. And if those competitors are operating with more favorable tax laws and more reasonable government regulations, then the American company is put at a great disadvantage. And so as a result, under the current tax laws, these inversions have been taking place, but the Treasury now has simply they've changed the rules in the middle of the game, and which is another bad thing. No capitalist country can operate without the rule of law. And in fact, it says here, if the rules can be changed arbitrarily and applied retroactively, how can any U.S. company engage in long-term investment planning necessary to compete? The new rules show that there are no set rules. Political dogma is the only rule. So in other words, the rule of man is superseding the rule of law, which is leading to economic slowdown. And who is affected by the economic slowdown the most? Me or you? You are, right? The millennial generation is the one that's paying the price for all this. Says here, let's see. Congress, consumer finance, for-profit education, carbon energy, auto lending, auto fuel economy, truck emissions, home mortgages, health care, and so much more has all been greatly influenced by government edict. Capital investment in this recovery has been disappointingly low, and one major reason is political intrusion into every corner of business decision making. Says to adapt, the only rule is that the rules are whatever the government wants them to be. The results have been slow growth, small wage gains, and a growing sense that there is no legal restraint on the political class. So anyway, that's something to give you food for thought. See, what is the only way that our Constitution can protect our personal liberties? The only way that our Constitution protects our personal liberty is by making sure that power is decentralized. What the Constitution does, it says the President has these powers, the Senate has these powers, the House of Representatives has these powers, the states have these powers, cities have these powers, localities have these powers. I mean, see, as long as power remains decentralized, then no one group or person can gain absolute power to take away our freedom. But the biggest threat to our freedom is the concentration of power, especially if that concentration takes place with absolutely no input in terms of the people, in terms of democracy. So keep that in mind. And as we go through this political year, I mean, that's the one thing I look at is are these policies leading to a greater government power, or are they leading to more power to the people? Well, along those lines, I got an interesting video for you. The name of the video is History of the Federal Reserve and JFK's, that's John Fitzgerald Kennedy, President of the United States in the early 60s, Executive Order 11110. Now, what is Executive Order 11110? What Executive Order 11110 is the attempt of the Kennedy administration to take the monetary power away from central bankers and give it back to the government, tucking it under the U.S. Treasury. Executive Order 11110 is when President Kennedy, through this executive order, gave the U.S. Treasury the commitment to start issuing silver certificates, money that was backed up by silver in the U.S. Treasury. And this was an attempt to bring. See, the question is, should our money and money policies be controlled by private bankers, or should be under the control of our government? Right now, it's under the control of private bankers. And what Executive Order 110 was the attempt to bring it back under, our money policies under the U.S. government. And but then when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, this executive order was nullified. It's still a law, but it's not been. The silver certificates that were brought into circulation have been taken out of circulation, and of course all we have left is the Federal Reserve notes of the Federal Reserve. But anyway, that's the history. As you watch this video, there's a part 1 and part 2. They're about 8 minutes long each. We'll see part 1 now and part 2 the next time. But this chapter is on inflation and what causes inflation. Well, inflation is always a monetary thing. See, generally speaking, if you increase the money supply more than you increase goods and services, then you will get inflation. Now, of course, it's more complicated than that, and we'll get into the more complications in this chapter, but the point I'm making here is that inflation is a monetary phenomenon. And who controls our money? The Federal Reserve. And so what this video is all about is is our Federal Reserve. How it was established, some of the history behind it, and some of the results. But I think you'll find this interesting. And if I can put the sound on.
The American Revolutionary War began as the American colonies sought to detach from England and its oppressive monarchy. Though many reasons are cited for the revolution, one in particular sticks out as the prime cause, that King George III of England outlawed the interest-free, independent currency the colonies were producing and using for themselves, in turn forcing them to borrow money from the Central Bank of England at interest, immediately putting the colonies into debt. And, as Benjamin Franklin later wrote, the refusal of King George III to allow the colonies to operate an honest money system which freed the ordinary man from the clutches of the money manipulators was probably the prime cause of the revolution. In 1783, America won its independence from England. However, its battle against the central bank concept and the corrupt, greed-filled men associated with it had just begun. So what is a central bank? A central bank is an institution that produces the currency of an entire nation. Based on historical precedent, two specific powers are inherent in central banking practice: the control of interest rates and the control of the money supply, or inflation. The central bank does not simply supply a government's economy with money, it loans it to them at interest. Then, through the use of increasing and decreasing the supply of money, the central bank regulates the value of the currency being issued. It is critical to understand that the entire structure of this system can only produce one thing in the long run: debt. It doesn't take a lot of ingenuity to figure this scam out. For every single dollar produced by the central bank is loaned at interest. That means every single dollar produced is actually the dollar plus a certain percent of debt based on that dollar. And since the central bank has the monopoly over the production of the currency for the entire country, and they loan each dollar out with immediate debt attached to it, where does the money to pay for the debt come from? It can only come from the central bank again, which means the central bank has to perpetually increase its money supply to temporarily cover the outstanding debt created, which in turn, since that new money is loaned out at interest as well, creates even more debt. The end result of this system without fail is slavery, for it is impossible for the government and thus the public to ever come out of the self-generating debt. The founding fathers of this country were well aware of this. By the early 20th century, the U.S. had already implemented and removed a few central banking systems, which were swindled into place by ruthless banking interests. At this time, the dominant families in the banking and business world were the Rockefellers, the Morgans, the Warburgs, the Rothschilds. And in the early 1900s, they sought to push, once again, legislation to create another central bank. However, they knew the government and public were very weary of such an institution, so they needed to create an incident to affect public opinion. So, J.P. Morgan, publicly considered a financial luminary at the time, exploited his mass influence by publishing rumors that a prominent bank in New York was insolvent or bankrupt. Morgan knew this would cause mass hysteria, which would affect other banks as well. And it did. The public, in fear of losing their deposits, immediately began mass withdrawals. Consequently, the banks were forced to call in their loans, causing the recipients to sell their property, and thus a spiral of bankruptcies, repossessions, and turmoil emerged. Putting the pieces together a few years later, Frederick Allen of Life magazine wrote, "The Morgan interests took advantage to precipitate the panic, guiding it shrewdly as it progressed. Unaware of the fraud, the Panic of 1907 led to a congressional investigation headed by Senator Nelson Aldrich, who had intimate ties to the banking cartels and later became part of the Rockefeller family through marriage. The commission, led by Aldrich, recommended a central bank should be implemented so a panic like 1907 could never happen again. This was the spark the international bankers needed to initiate their plan. In 1910, a secret meeting was held at a J.P. Morgan estate on Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia. It was there that the central banking bill called the Federal Reserve Act was written. This legislation was written by bankers, not lawmakers. This meeting was so secretive, so concealed from government and public knowledge that the 10 or so figures who attended disguised their names when en route to the island. After this bill was constructed, it was then handed over to their political frontman, Senator Nelson Aldrich, to push through Congress. And in 1913, with heavy political sponsorship by the bankers, Woodrow Wilson became president, having already agreed to sign the Federal Reserve Act in exchange for campaign support. And 2 days before Christmas, when most of Congress was at home with their families, the Federal Reserve Act was voted in, and Wilson in turn made it law. Years later, Woodrow Wilson wrote, in regret, Congressman Lewis McFadden also expressed the truth after the passage of the bill. A world banking system was being set up here, a superstate controlled by international bankers, acting together to enslave the world for their own pleasure. The Fed has usurped the government. Now, the public was told that the Federal Reserve System was an economic stabilizer, and inflation and economic crises were a thing of the past. Well, as history has shown, nothing is further from the truth. The fact is, the international bankers now had a streamlined machine to expand their personal ambitions. For example, from 1914 to 1919, the Fed increased the money supply by nearly 100%, resulting in extensive loans to small banks and the public. Then, in 1920, the Fed called in mass percentages of the outstanding money supply, thus resulting in the supporting banks having to call in huge numbers of loans, and just like 1907, bank runs, bankruptcy, and collapse occurred. Over 5,400 competitive banks outside of the Federal Reserve System collapsed, further consolidating the monopoly of a small group of international bankers. Privy to this crime, Congressman Lindbergh stepped up and said in 1921, under the Federal Reserve Act, panics are scientifically created. The present panic is the first scientifically created one, worked out as we figure a mathematical equation. However, the Panic of 1920 was just a warm-up. From 1921 to 1929, the Fed again increased the money supply, resulting once again in extensive loans to the public and banks. There was also a fairly new type of loan called a margin loan in the stock market. Very simply, the margin loan allowed an investor to put down only 10% of a stock's price, with the other 90% being loaned through the broker. In other words, a person could own $1,000 worth of stock with only $100 down. This method was very popular in the roaring 1920s, as everyone seemed to be making money in the market. However, there was a catch to this loan.
Well, that's the first part. Let's see.
Autoplay.
Let's see.
Do you know what?
Huh. Okay, well, any questions? Well, let me turn the lights on. Okay, any questions about any of that? Well, hopefully it'll give you some food for thought. We'll see the second part next time. Let's see, let me get to these slides. This is chapter 8, slideshow from beginning. And inflation. So what is inflation? A pervasive and general rise in the average price level. Now the point here is that it is perfectly normal and desirable for some prices to increase, because that's how businesses know what we want, through the price mechanism. Inflation isn't only occurs when there is an increase in the average level of prices. So we could have 50% of goods and services going up in price by 10%, but if the other 50% went down in price by 10%, then the inflation rate would be zero. So you can't just look out there in the economy and see, oh, the price of this is increasing, the price of that's increasing, looks like we've got inflation. Well, no, because you have to look at the general price level in order to determine whether we have inflation or not. So what is the Consumer Price Index? Consumer Price Index is measures price increases of a particular basket of goods and services. Now there are different methods to calculate inflation, but the most common, the ones most looked at is the Consumer Price Index. Now one reason the Consumer Price Index is the most important is that the federal government indexes government payments according to inflation. Now what that means is that if a person is receiving Social Security and the inflation rate in a certain year is, let's say, 5%, then the next year that person gets a 5% increase in their income, so that their real income doesn't change, see, because they're compensated for the higher prices. Now that's called indexing. And so if we say, okay, if inflation is 5%, then anyone receiving government payments gets a pay raise of 5%. Well, what inflation are we talking about? And the answer is the Consumer Price Index. See, that it's the Consumer Price Index that determines pay and our monetary increases for payments like Social Security and other government programs. So what is the Consumer Price Index? Well, it's not a measure of all goods and services. It's a measure the change in price of a particular basket of goods and services. What we do is we got this basket, and the things we put in this basket are those goods and services that consumers normally buy. Now as time goes on, we change what's in the basket. Like several years ago, iPhones was not in that basket because no one knew what an iPhone was, I mean, can you believe the iPhone has only been around for 6 years? Isn't that unbelievable? I mean, that is truly amazing. I think about that. Wow. Almost every person on earth now has an iPhone. But the point is that okay, well, with almost everyone in the world owning an iPhone, well, shouldn't an iPhone be a part of this basket? But if it was only invented a few years ago, we have to add it. Well, there are other things in the basket that used to be popular but are no longer popular because of a change in technology or a change in consumer taste, and so we have to take those things out of the basket. So this basket is changing from time period to time period, but it reflects those goods and services that consumers normally buy. And then what we do is we measure the change in price of only those goods and services that are in the basket, and that is the Consumer Price Index. Okay. See, there are other price indexes. For example, there's the Wholesale Price Index, which measures wholesale prices instead of retail prices. And there's a purpose for these other inflation measures, but the one that's most important to the average person, like I say, is the Consumer Price Index. So what is the price mechanism? The adjustment of prices in response to changing market conditions. And is any increase in prices inflationary? No, I just talked about this. Some prices will always increase because of the price mechanism, which is what we're going to talk about next. See, what are the three roles that prices play? See, in a system where you have no central authority, where goods and services are made available through private enterprise, how is it that business people know what the average consumer wants? And the answer is via the price mechanism. So let's say you were an inventor of a new product, and you put the product out there in the market. Well, the question is, what price are you going to charge? And there are different ways to ascertain what is the best price. You consider your cost, and you consider potential competitors, and there's a bunch of stuff that you might consider. But when all is said and done, it's just an educated guess. So you put a price on it, thinking that that's the best price. Well, what's going to happen after you put a price on it? Well, now the market takes over. See, ultimately, it's not business owners that determine the price. It's the market determines the price, at least in a free market.
Isn't it also like competitors? Like one will come out with like exactly the same thing at like a lower price. So
well,
they'll
that's
be forced to like.
Well, yeah, that's not quite on the topic, but sure. I mean, if prices increase, and once a firm starts making very generous profits,
like
then others will enter into the industry, and the supply therefore will increase, bringing price down. Which is, I guess, that's a good point to make here. If good profits are being made, and if you have competition, more will enter into the industry to partake in the profits. Supply goes up, price comes down, and that's the reason why in a free market we are provided these goods and services at reasonable prices. See, it's because of competition. But the point I'm making here is the price mechanism. How is it that producers know what we want? Well, they know what we want because if you have a new product and you put out there in the market, you put a certain price on it. If you charge too high of a price, not many people will buy it from you. You'll have a surplus, excessive inventory, and you'll have to. It may not be you as a producer, but it may be retail store owners who are selling your product. But they're gonna lower the price in order to sell the product, because they paid for these products, and unless they can sell them, they're not going to get their money back. So they've got to lower the price to sell. So what information is conveyed to the producer because prices of their product is going down? People want less. Now, if you put some out there in the market and it's very popular and a bunch of people want it, consumers bid the price up. Well, now what information is conveyed to the producer? Well, people want more. So prices going up and down convey information from the consumer to the producer. That's a critical role of the price mechanism. This is why things like a wage price freeze or any system that dictates prices work against this natural price mechanism. The second role of prices here is that it gives incentives. Okay, business know what let's say you put something out there in the market, a lot of people want it, they compete against one another, they bid the price up. Okay, you, the producer, you know that they want more, but what's your incentive to produce more? Well, the incentive is more money, more higher profits. How come you're making higher profits? Because the people are bidding the price up, which enables you to make more money. So because the price goes up, the producer has an incentive to give the consumer what the consumer wants. And thirdly, the third role of the price mechanism in a free market is they provide working capital, financial capital, that is. What this means is, okay, the price goes up, people want more, okay, you've got an incentive to give them more, but you need to build more factories, you need to buy more machines, you need to buy more raw materials, you need to hire more labor. Now, where's all that money going to come from? Well, ultimately, that money is going to come from the higher price. The price goes up, you make more money. Now you're able to give consumers what consumers want. See, this is the beauty. All of this, by the way, was explained in detail by Adam Smith way back in 1776. I mean, everything I've said so far, you could read this book written back in the 1700s and get the same explanation. I mean, not much, nothing's changed. Which two categories are left out of the core inflation rate? Food and energy. See, there was a time when the consumer price index included the change in price of food and energy, but several years ago the government decided to take out these two items from the consumer price index. Now, in terms of the average consumer, what prices affect us the most? Well, food and energy. But one of the reasons, some people think, I guess I can say it that way, remember I told you that government programs are indexed to inflation, right? So like if a person's receiving Social Security, if inflation's 5%, then the next year they get a 5% raise, correct? Well, what would happen if the government changed the rules in terms of the consumer price index so that it measured a lower inflation from year to year? How much money could the government save? Y'all get the picture? Okay. Anyway, something to think about. What is the recent history of inflation? 46 to 48, 8%. See, what happened is, what America did during World War II was nothing short of a miracle. That we were able to turn our factories into manufacturing warships and airplanes, and I mean it was phenomenal. I mean we could build a whole warship in just a couple days.
Yeah, I read something saying that like a Twinkie factory,
yeah,
like it would turn into like a M1A1 Abrams rifle.
Yeah. We took
all
our
these companies.
Companies that produce. Yeah. Making chocolates and other consumer items. They were overnight. They were turned into making military goods. And what we did is nothing short of a miracle to prepare for World War II. Well, then what happened is that in August of 1945, the war ended, and now we had what is called pent-up demand. In other words, during the World War II, we reached full employment. More people were making an income, but they couldn't spend their money on consumer goods so much because we weren't producing consumer goods. Instead of manufacturing chocolate, that factory was making rifles or something. So.
And also that it was I guess a propaganda poster of with the women like strong type of thing, like helping out in the war. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah, well sure. There's always that.
Rosie
the Riveter. Yeah, Rosie the Riveter. Because that something that happened during the war is that there was a big push for women to enter the workforce. Mm-hmm. Now what happened, interestingly, is that a lot of those women left the workforce after the war, and so that during the 50s and 60s, the average family in America only had one income.
Isn't that because of the baby boomers after World War?
Yeah, well, the baby boom. I guess we call the baby boom generation is that those children born after 1945 and about 1956. It's called the baby boom generation, which is. It's kind of like if you can think of a boa constrictor swallowing, a cow. It's it kind of moves through the boa constrictor, and that's kind of like what the baby boom generation has been in terms of our demographics. But it was not till the 1970s when we had stagflation, which is the topic of the next chapter, that the more women once again entered the workforce. So that by the middle 1970s, the two-income family was more common than the one-income family. But anyway, that's just a bit of history. So anyway, what happened though here strictly in terms of inflation is that we had a lot of pent-up demand after the war. People had money, but there's not many consumer goods. It took us a while, months, years, to convert a military wartime economy into a peacetime economy. Convert our factories from making guns to making chocolate, and so during that period up to 1948, we had a fairly high inflation rate of about 8%. But then from 48 to 70, our inflation rate was only 2% annually. And then from 1969 to 79, prices doubled. Now, to get an idea of doubling, you can take the rule of 72. You take any incremental increase and divide it into 72, and that will tell you how long it'll take that increase to double in value. For example, during the 1970s, we had an average annual inflation rate of about 10% a year. Well, if you convert that to the rule of 72, 10 goes into 72 about 7 times. So that means that with an inflation rate of 10% annually, year after year, it will take 7 years for prices to double. Okay? Anyway, that's what we had during the 70s. And I'm not going to go to this website, but you may want to see what the current statistics are. But I got to rush through this, or we'll never get through it. Why is inflation called an arbitrary tax? See, if the government were to increase our taxes, what would happen to our buying power, or the income that we can spend? It would go down, right? Well, what does inflation do? Well, if prices increase more than your income increases, then your buying power goes down. So what is the difference between you paying a higher tax and therefore having less money to spend, or you experiencing inflation, you see, which erodes your buying power, which means you have less money in real terms to spend? And that's why inflation is like an arbitrary tax. Okay, it's money, it's money taken out of our pockets. And but it's different than a tax, because with a tax, the government can fashion the tax code specifically so that certain people will pay so much and other people will pay more or less. But with inflation, it's not so specific. Inflation affects people arbitrarily. So who is hurt most by inflation? Well, the people who are hurt most by inflation are people who are on a relatively fixed income. The more your income is fixed relative to the inflation rate, then the more you're hurt by that inflation. So, for example, people who subsist on Social Security may not live well, but they're not hurt so much by inflation, because with every rate increase in the price level, they're paid more money, at least annually. So somewhat they are protected, you see, from the higher prices. So they're not hurt so much from inflation. Low income earners, very often wage earners, people who are simply trading hours for dollars, are hurt most by inflation, because they have least control over their income. People who have more control over their income can increase their income commensurate with the increase in prices, so they're not hurt so much by the inflation. See, inflation is very personal, very personal. I mean, we might say that we've got a 10% inflation rate. Of course, today it would be close to zero, but that's not to say that everyone has experienced the same inflation rate. I mean, the inflation rate that I face may be totally different than the inflation rate that you face. Why? Because the things that I buy, because I'm years older than you, the things I buy may be totally different than the things that you buy. So the things that I buy might be going up in price, but the things that you normally buy are going down in price. See, inflation can be a very personal thing. So we can't really look at it as just blanket, inflation rate. And who measures inflation? It is published monthly by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And they, one of these government agencies that, they do what they do, and no one really knows how, but as far as I know, this group is trusted in terms of their statistics. See, some government agencies are trusted and some are not. Like I say, they all kind of work independently. It's not just the government; it's this agency and that agency, and they're all independent, and they all work within their sphere of influence. The Consumer Price Index, okay, I just talked about that, and I talked about that. Okay, if inflation is 10% and you get a 7% raise, what has happened to your money income and your real income? Your money income has increased by 7%, but your real income has decreased by 3%. See, money income is how many dollar bills you get in your paycheck. Real income is what those dollar bills can buy. So your income may stay the same from year to year, but your real income can go down if the things that you personally buy are increasing in price. So, for a while, some people can be fooled by their money income, but it doesn't take too long for them to realize that what really counts is their real income, not their money income. Now, what is the percent increase from 30,000 to 32,000? If let's say you got a job pays you 30,000, and you get a raise to 32,000, what percent increase is that? Well, mathematically, you take the difference between the two numbers and you divide by the original number. So the difference between 30,000 and 32,000 is 2,000 divided by the original number, which is 30,000, or this is a 6.7% increase. Now, if your income goes up from 30,000 to 32,000 and inflation is 7% or 5%, are you better off or worse off? Well, you're better off because your real income has increased by 1.7%. So if you know mathematically how to calculate a percent increase or percent decrease and then compare that to the inflation rate, then you can ascertain whether you're better off or worse off. This mathematical computation of a percent increase or percent decrease is used a lot in economics. So you should know that any percent increase or percent decrease is the difference between two numbers divided by the original number. So what is the rule of 72? And I just explained that too. I get ahead of myself sometime in these lectures. But you take any incremental increase divided into 72, and they'll give you how many years approximately it'll take that number to double in value, which again is just a general way of eyeballing, things getting better, things getting worse. At 2%, how long would it take prices to double? Well, 2 goes into 72 36 times, so it would take 36 years for prices to double. If inflation is 10%, 10 goes into 72 7 times, so it would take 7 years for prices to double. Now, notice the difference. A 2% inflation rate, 36 years for prices to double. But a 10% rate, only 7 years. I mean, it shows you how much of an impact any increase in the price level has on our lives. Now, what gives anything value? Everything that you can name has value for the same two reasons. Number one is usefulness, and number two is level of scarcity. Something only has value if it's useful and is relatively scarce. The more useful and the more scarce, the higher the value. That's just the way markets work. So what gives a country's currency value? Well, its usefulness and level of scarcity, right? I mean, currency is useful because we can buy things. See, why is it that what's one reason that foreigners want to possess American dollars? Because with American dollars, they can buy American products. See, I mean, why is it that we in America want to possess American dollars? Because we can buy at the store goods and services with American dollars. All right? If you have a euro, a pocket full of euros, can you go down to the local grocery store and buy groceries? No. Why? Well, they're not going to accept euros. They only accept dollars, American dollars, because we live in America, right? So a country's currency has value based on what that currency can buy in the source, the country, the source, the country. You know, why do foreigners want to possess American dollars? Because they can buy from America, or they can put money in American banks, or they can buy American business, or buy American real estate. That's why, well, of course, one big reason, because the dollar is the world standard currency, is that with American dollars they can buy from other countries, because many other countries say, well, if you want to buy from us, you have to convert your currency into American dollars, and then you buy from us. Okay, that's called the petrodollar system, which has made America the standard world currency. So see, that's another reason why foreigners would want to possess American dollars. Now, by the way, what is happening to this petrodollar system? Is it strengthening or weakening?
Strengthening?
No, it's weakening. It's weakening because many other nations are making alternative arrangements to trade amongst themselves without using the American dollar. Japan and China, for example, and Russia has made many agreements with other countries where they say, well, if you want to buy from us, you just use your own currency. You don't need American dollars. So the petrodollar system is on its way out. Okay, it may not even exist in 5 years. In other words, the dollar may not be the world standard currency in another 3 to 5 years. So anyway, what gives a country's currency value? The goods and service which that currency can buy. And is there anything wrong with the slow and steady rate of inflation? No, especially when inflation is anticipated. If we have like a 2% inflation rate year after year, and that 2% is totally anticipated, that need not be any problem at all. Now, when is inflation a problem? Well, inflation is a problem when it's higher than, let's say, 2%, and especially when it is unanticipated. You know, when we don't know what to expect. You know, we think it's going to be 5%, but it's 12%, or we think it's going to be 10%, but it's only 4%. I mean, you know, that, you know, not being able to correctly anticipate the future in terms of prices is very dangerous to a free market system. Okay, so it's not only the rate of inflation that can be good or bad, but it's the change from year to year, and whether it can be correctly anticipated or not, that determines whether what's happening is good or bad. See, how does inflation change society? It breeds uncertainty, diminishes buying power, erodes real savings, causes unemployment, alters social traditions, and confuses the price mechanism. See, if we have erratic inflation, then and along, especially with high rates of inflation, when prices change, how does the business owner know whether that price change is because of the normal price mechanism or because that price change is a result of inflation? So consequently, confusion sets in. And with confusion, we see business owners make business decisions, they make investments based on their expectation of what is going to happen in the future. Okay? It's not what's happening today that determines the level of investments, but it's investors' anticipation of what they think is going to happen in the future that determines the rate of investment. All right? So if inflation is erratic, and especially if it's high at the same time, it confuses the price mechanism. I mean, it's like you're watching TV and someone's fooling. Of course, today there are no dials. I mean, it's every time I get a new TV, I got to learn how to turn the thing on. But there used to be dials that you could adjust on a TV, if you can imagine such a thing. And so as you adjust these dials, the picture starts going funny, and in the old days, I mean, you could actually see this. I don't know if you can do it with modern TVs, but the point is that inflation, it confuses the communication between the consumer and the producer, and with confusion, doubt and fear sets in the minds of the investor, and there's a slowdown in the level of investments and a slowdown in economic activity. All right. See, that's one of the reasons why we have a sluggish economy today. It's not inflation that's causing the confusion, but it's the willy-nilly change in government policy that is confusing investors. But the end result is the same. The end result is a lack of investments that will generate new jobs. How did the inflation of the 70s affect society? Now, the point I'm making here is that inflation is more than simply an increase in the average price level. And inflation is really more than, some people experience a decline in their buying power. I mean, it's more than that. Because inflation can change the very fabric of society. See, for example, what I explained earlier is that during the war, many women went into the workforce, and then after the war, they left the workforce, and the two-income family during the 50s and 60s was most common. But then it was the stagflation in the 70s. Now, in the 70s, we had an average annual inflation rate of 10%. Now, with an average annual inflation rate of 10%, how long did it take prices to double? Well, using the rule of 72, it took 7 years. So during the 70s, in a 7-year time span, prices essentially doubled. Now, if you look at those years, how many people's incomes doubled in the same time period? Well, not many. And so one thing about human nature is that the average person will very rarely go above and beyond and leave their comfort zone to have more than what they have been accustomed to. We are all creatures of habit. Whatever state in life that we, have been used to, maybe that we've been born and raised in, that's what we're comfortable with. All right? And so what happened is that we had a doubling of incomes, of prices during the 70s, and people may not change to have more than what they've been accustomed to, but the average person will change if they are faced with losing what they have been accustomed to. Y'all get this? Very few people will go above and beyond make a sacrifice to have more than what they've been used to, but people will change when they're faced with losing what they have been accustomed to. Okay? And that's what happened during the 70s with inflation much more than people's incomes, any increase in their incomes. People were faced with losing a lifestyle that they had been accustomed to. So what change took place? Well, what change took place is the second income. And in many families, it was meant to be temporary. Well, we haven't been able to make our mortgage payment. We haven't been able to make our lifestyle is eroding. We might have to move to a smaller house. We might have to sell our car and buy an old jalopy. And we don't want to do that. So you, wife, if you go into the workforce, we can almost double our income, and we can keep all these things. So once we get ahead of our bills, once we get these things paid off, maybe, then you can quit your job and come on home. Well, did they come home? No, because again, society changed, and what was common changed. What people were used to changed. Instead of a one-income family being accepted, the two-income family became accepted. And so, and of course, by then, what did the family do? Well, instead of paying off their bills, they simply bought a bigger car and a bigger house. And besides, with the wife working, she needs a car, and she needs a new wardrobe, and she need, what I mean? I mean, your needs increase. You need more money for babysitters, and when the wife is working and mother, and so what this did is it changed society. It changed the very fabric of what we considered normal or how we lived. It changed our lifestyles, is what I'm saying. Fast food restaurants became popular in the 70s because before this, people ate at home mostly, but with two incomes, we don't have time. I mean, Johnny's got a baseball practice at 5, and we don't have time to, make dinner, so we go out to a place like McDonald's and grab a quick burger to get to the baseball game. And so, fast food restaurants became popular during the 70s. See, all these things have a reason. Things don't come into being just, for no reason at all. So now, what causes inflation? The money supply has to increase more than goods and services, which is a very simplistic explanation. I'm going to give you a more specific, more involved explanation here in just a minute. But don't think that money is anything special, all right? I mean, I do have a few bills with me today. See, here's like a $10 bill. Now, this $10 bill has value for the same reason that door or this computer here has value. The only reason this has value is because it's useful. We can use it to buy things. And it's relatively scarce. I mean, if these things were so plentiful that we could go outside and pick them off the ground, like leaves in the fall, how much value would each of these bills have? I mean, if they were that easy to come by, we could just go outside and they were just like Ben Bernanke's flying overhead, or Janet Yellen is flying overhead and is dumping money out the air, on an airplane, and it's just raining money. Well, if money was that easy to come by, how much value would each unit have? Not very much. And if each unit had very little value, how many units would it take when we go to the store to buy things? A lot more units. And that's what inflation is.
Isn't that why they were using money during, in Germany in World War I or II? They were literally just burning it for
Yeah, in Germany. This is what happened in Germany. In the early 30s, the German mark, then they were using marks, not euros, became so plentiful that people were, they would actually bundle the bills together and burn them because that was cheaper than using it to buy firewood, or they would wallpaper their walls with German marks because that was cheaper than using the money to go buy wallpaper. Yeah, I mean, money became so plentiful that people would have to go to the store with a whole wheelbarrow full of German marks and walk away with a loaf of bread. I mean, that's how bad inflation was. And but what caused that is that when money becomes so plentiful that the value of each unit goes down, then it takes more units when we buy things, and that's what inflation is. Okay? And so, but the point I'm making here is that, there's no difference between this bill and that door in terms of value. That door has value because it's useful and it's relatively scarce. This computer has value because it's useful and relatively scarce. This bill has value because it's useful and relatively scarce. The only difference between this bill and that door is that they have different uses, period. And their level of scarcity is different. But that's still, it's just dollar. Don't think that money is anything special. It's not. It's just something else that has a purpose. All right. And the laws of economics affects dollar bills the same as it can affect every other good and service, the same way. So, what does the foreign sector have to do with inflation? If more, when we talk about inflation, at least here in America, we're talking about America as if it were a ball, and it's the activity within that sphere, you see, that determines our inflation rate. Well, if more money from outside the system enters this sphere, then the money supply increases, and we could have inflation. Okay. All right, hope you get your car fixed.
Thanks.
Yeah. So this is one point I made earlier. The Federal Reserve, has created billions and billions of dollars. In fact, for several years, it was creating about $80 billion a month of new money. Now, why has that not caused inflation? Anybody?
Because it's being used for something.
Yeah, it's being used for, in other words, the money has not gotten into, not much of the money has gotten into our sphere, our system. It's gone out there into the netherworld, you see. And mostly it's gone where? Into the netherworld.
Everywhere.
No, it's mostly gone into the derivatives market. The derivatives market is over a $600 trillion a year market. And that's where the money is gone. Well, who participates in the derivatives market? High money rollers. No, not the average person. I mean, raise your hand if you've done business in the derivatives market. Well, I'll bring down my hand. I haven't. I mean, the common person doesn't deal in the derivatives market, right? The derivatives market is for high rollers, for institutions, for banks, big banks especially. Deutsche Bank, $75 trillion. Citibank, $62 trillion in the derivatives market. See, those are actual figures. I mean, real figures, accurate figures. So, so the foreign sector, you see, can influence inflation. In this case, with most of the newly created money going into the outside the system, despite the fact that we've created all this new money, we have not experienced inflation. Now, if this $80 billion a month of new money had gotten into our system, what kind of inflation would we be experiencing today? Hyperinflation. Okay? But instead, we've got almost a 0% inflation. Now, here's where we really get into the nitty-gritty. Okay, this is what is central to this whole discussion of inflation. See, what really determines the price level? Well, it's more than simply the money supply and goods and services. And see here, M stands for money, the quantity of money. Like that $80 billion a month of newly created money. That's money supply. V is velocity. Velocity is how quickly money changes hands. You know, if a dollar changes hands once a month, then that dollar would have half the influence of a dollar that exchanged hands every 2 weeks. See, it's not so much on how much money we have, but it's how quickly that money goes from person to person to person. That's called velocity. And P stands for the general price level, and Q stands for quantity, which is gross domestic product, you know, the measure of new and final goods and services. So what really determines the price level? Well, if you do some mathematics here, you divide both sides of the equation by Q. So instead of MV equals P times Q, you get M times V divided by Q. This is what really determines the average price level. See, it's money times velocity divided by Q. Well, why is Q in the denominator? Well, when things become more plentiful and easier to come by, what happens to the price? Yeah, well, no. When things are easier, if there's not much competition and things are easier to come by, are we anxious to bid against one another to bid the price up? No, because there's plenty for everybody. See, when things become more plentiful, when Q goes up, P goes down. See, when things are easier to come by and there's not much competition, well, the price level goes down because we don't have to bid against one another so much to determine who gets what because there's so much for everybody. But if Q goes down, where things become more scarce, therefore there's more competition between you and me of who's going to get and who's not going to get. Well, we bid against one another and we bid the price up. So when Q goes down, P goes up. When Q goes up, P goes down. And that's why Q is in the denominator, because there's an inverse relationship between Q and P. So what really determines the price level? The amount of money we have times the velocity of that money divided by the quantity, which is GDP, goods and services. That's what actually determines the price level. Now, what happens to velocity during depressions as opposed to boom times? Slows down. During depressions, the velocity slows down. During boom times, velocity of money increases.
Isn't it like why they say like war is actually good for the economy or something? Because it ramps up.
Well, normally they're not. You're normally talking about inflation. They're normally talking about unemployment. There's an incorrect belief that if we have unemployment, that if we simply got into a war, that would stimulate demand and that would bring us to full employment, which essentially did happen during World War II.
Yeah.
And of course, what economist would advocate that? A Keynesian or an Austrian?
The
Keynesian, a Keynesian, but an Austrian certainly would not. Again, you've got two different viewpoints. And of course, wars have other consequences than just, employment and the price level. What can lower the rate of inflation? We can decrease M, the money supply. We can decrease velocity or increase GDP or Q. See, that's how we would get lower inflation. Now, who influences our money supply? The Federal Reserve. And that's what this video that I showed you was all about. I mean, we as a country we may have to come to grips someday with answering the question of who should control our money supply, private bankers or our government. Right now, it's private bankers. But that may change in the future. The Federal Reserve controls our money supply. Do government-mandated price controls work? No, they simply alter the economic system. For example, shortages in the former Soviet Union. Some people think, well, if we have a problem with inflation, all we got to do is pass a law mandating that there's no increase in prices. This is something Richard Nixon did. We had a wage price freeze under President Richard Nixon. When inflation was so bad during the 70s, one of the answers was, well, we got a problem here. Let's just pass a law against it, and that's going to solve the problem. Well, what is the problem of simply passing a law against the problem? Well, the problem, is that we generate a worse situation because we distort and could even destroy the price mechanism. See, if we have a wage price freeze, if we simply pass a law against inflation, then the price mechanism, the way I explained it, doesn't work anymore. And if the price mechanism doesn't work, then by default, the government will dictate all prices. And then we get into the question of, what kind of people are we? I mean, are we a free people in a democracy, or are we controlled people, by a dictatorial government? I mean, that's got lots of implications. Anyway, I've run out of time, so this is slide 30. We're about halfway through, so we'll finish this next time.